Welcome, everybody. My name is Deirdre Karen, and today we're going to talk about the BIZBOK 14 update. Now, I do want to say that we do this every year, so our team goes through all of the details of what has been changed so that your learning is a lot easier for everybody else. So let's get started. All right, so first, let me just introduce myself. My name, as I said, is Deirdre Karen. I am the founder of Agora Insights. That is a training provider that has worked all over the world helping architects and analysts get certified. I'm also the co-founder of Aiden.ai, something new to add to the list. And in terms of training, we support people from over 90 countries. So it's almost 100, but we can't say 100 yet. So I think it's 97, somewhere around there. And I have found that over the years of doing this and learning about architecture and AI and all kinds of things, that I believe architecture is going to become more and more important in AI. So that's good news story for all the BARCs out there. All right, so first let's look at BIZBOK. So the purpose, it's a guide, it's the body of knowledge for business architecture. And it provides an industry standard and framework from which we can work. So that's very helpful. But today we really want to know what changed from BIZBOK 13 to BIZBOK 14. So we're looking at number one, overarchingly improving the grammar in certain things. Now, one of the things that I look at when we look at the BIZBOK guide is I don't really want you to worry about your exams. As a Guild accredited training provider, every year what we do is we look at the content that's been updated and we say, is there an impact on those who are preparing for exams? And our role is to provide you with the information of what has changed, but also to tell you if any of those changes would affect you in your study. And so, good news, nothing is going to affect any of your exams at this particular point. So, everything that we have in our course is there to help you prepare for your exam. So, there's nothing to worry about, but there are some interesting things that I would like to talk about. And I would also like to take this session a little bit further than what we've done previously. And I will be discussing how some of the changes could affect what we're thinking about in AI. And I think that's exciting for architects. So generally, the changes have been improved grammar and images. Now, with the improved images, in our courses, we do our own images because not all of the images are ideal for learners. So we always do our own images unless explicitly said so, where I will reference if an image comes from another source or if the image is the direct image from BIZBOK. We do have an update on dynamic rules-based routing. A very important update. It was a really tough session for me to go through because I've never really focused on dynamic route routing, but every year there's more changes that occur with it, and I'm starting to see it's very important. And having been working in AI for some time now, I think that this is going to be definitely the route to go with AI. All right, so as I mentioned, we've got dynamic route routing and also some emphasis on a binding object, some new words. So I'm here to help you with those binding objects. And just to remind everybody that the updates are done by volunteers that supply material and so forth. So it's not as if it's a super formal structure, but obviously you'll notice that in some chapters there might be some differences, or some parts, I suppose, there might be some differences from other parts. So yeah, nothing to worry about, but just understand that these are the differences. As I mentioned, we do all of our own designs in our course. So when we look at the business architecture knowledge base, it is broken down into these sections. So we've got capabilities, and these would be what I would call the anchoring foundations of what we do as business architecture. We've got value streams, organizations, and information. And then part of that is strategies, initiatives, products, stakeholders, metrics, policies. And this all encompasses a business architecture, a knowledge base, and each one of these has business architecture blueprints. And when we are using our business architecture blueprints, we create scenarios. So these are the main areas we'll be talking about today. According to the changelog, there are minor changes into strategy, capability, organizational mapping, value stream mapping, should I say, information mapping, product, governance, case management, and dynamic rules writing. This is the biggest change. Business architecture and Lean Six Sigma, business architecture metrics, business requirements, business architecture and strategy to execution. And by the way, that is also been updated in our course. I'll get to that in a minute. The business architecture knowledge base has been updated in the design, and I'll show you what I'm going to be doing and why. And then the business architecture application portfolio, data architecture alignment, solution architecture, these are all text updates ready. And then IT architecture transformation and the glossary. Okay, let's get started. All right, capability mapping. Now, capability mapping, the changes are mostly just grammar, and just make sure that there's no impact on your exam or whatever. There's just some small grammatical changes, and I'll show you what that means, and also some changes in the principles. So this term in the principles of business capability mapping has been removed. So rarely change. That has been removed, and instead there is a new definition that business capability mapping named and defined by the individuals and the business units who have and exercise these capabilities. So as you can see, it's not a game changer, but obviously, if there was a question that popped up in the exam, it might be one of these. But as we know, there's no impact on the exam, as I mentioned. Then there's also been changes into the grammatical practices. Now, I feel like this is a lot of detail around capabilities that are not necessary. However, they are part of your exam. So you do need to know, like, what the comma is, the Oxford comma is, and you do need to understand these things. So this is actually important, even though it might seem trivial to do, but from an exam point of view, this is an important thing to remember. And this is why it's in the course in the first place. But what has changed is what not to do when defining capabilities. And so the practices of the using grammatical practices, that is in the exam and that is the same, but there are additional parts to this. Do not use EG or IE in capabilities or capability definitions. Use parentheses in capability definitions. So parentheses. So use the blah. So that's been a change. I do not believe you will be asked any exam questions on these two. But from what I do know in the exam, and it has been a while since I took it, but I don't believe it's changed, is that if you are asked anything in the exam about the grammar in capabilities, it'll be around the Oxford comma. That often gets asked. And the Oxford comma actually looks different to the image that we're showing you. All right, next. Capabilities, there's just been some text changes here and there, super minor. The changelog makes it sound like a lot, but no, there's just been some grammar-related changes. There is no change, no impact in your exam at all. So I'm just showing you the meta model, but no, there's been no, just in some of the words that were used in there, but not actually even in any of our pages. So you'll see what I just showed you these ones because they're in the course already, and that there's additional bits added to that course. However, as you can see, none of the grammar related changes are in the course because they're actually probably just definitions or examples that are used, but we use our own examples. Again, it has no impact on your course or your learning or your preparation for CBA. Same thing with organizational mapping. Again, it's just an example that has been edited, and so there is no impact for you in terms of organizational mapping. It is quite hard. So kudos to Andre who does all of the reviews, because it is a lot of hard work that goes into trying to go through 800 plus pages of BIZBOK to try find where the change is. Luckily for you, you don't have to worry about that, but it's just giving you an idea that there have been some tweaks here and there. And where that might matter is if you're looking at your study guide or you're looking at some other sources, it might seem slightly different. But again, if it's not in your training, it's probably not important. So everything important is in your training. So I use the knowledge base image relationships just as a placeholder, but it's got nothing to do with actual content. All right, information mapping. Super important chapter, one I struggled with at the very start of business architecture, but one that I feel is underrated and very important in what we do as architects, especially in the age of AI and large language models. There've been some minor grammatical updates as well. Again, an example that's given in BIZBOK, but it is not relevant to the training that we do. Okay, strategy mapping, the same thing. So you're going to find that there's been a lot of work researching what the changes are, but very little changes in terms of language and what we define as language importance. But strategy mapping, this is still the same meta model that we're using throughout. The same applies for product mapping. So product mapping, again, language and grammar has been updated. The scenario that gets used in product has got new language in it. But again, the scenario, the same thing with the capabilities, they use the term semantic, but that was just an example in the conversation, but it actually isn't a term that has been officially used in BIZBOK. So although it's in BIZBOK, it's not like in the glossary or anything like that. That's also had some minor changes, again, not affecting you. So let's go and have a look at your meta model. So we often talk about the meta model in module 10. Now, module 10 for your learning is a very important module because the module discusses all of the like the mini modules, that's what, or the mini knowledge base or meta model that I call them. Yeah. It also talks about the role of a business architect, and we've added that into your course. It also talks about the scenarios, the role, the maturity model as well. So a very important chapter, and I always recommend to all business architects, please go and get through the basic modules first, and then focus on how the relationships work, what your role is, etc., using module 10. Okay, so governance. Again, there's some grammatical updates that have been done. Let's just go back here. The update to the knowledge base is to provide a more streamlined version of the knowledge base. So even though there is a more streamlined version, and I actually do like the new version that they've created, we're still going to be using our version just because it incorporates requirements. So when it comes to the knowledge base diagram that is provided for you in BIZBOK, you are not questioned in your exams about this. So there's no questions around the knowledge base. So we can ad lib according to how we want. So as you can see, what I did is they try to make it less like all these lines are crossing. You don't know which line is going where, and you got to try track the thing. And I have a serious issue with a whole bunch of lines crossing each other. It's hard to trace. And so if you're going to do a visual diagram, I always say it's better to at least let people be able to see what's happening and not have to spend hours and hours trying to redo it. So they have done a better job. And as you can see, it's been redone. The decomposing works better. The lines are tracking and so forth. So I do prefer this version, to be honest. I think it's better than what we had before. However, as I said, we're still going to stick to our version, which includes requirements. So it covers a lot of what we do in business architecture and what is in the knowledge base. So I'm not suggesting don't use it. I'm just saying I have an issue with lines crossing in meta models. But essentially, and you'll see like strategy, we've had to put strategy in both places because it is almost impossible not to link the two. But we do have a meta model around requirements, and that has had a minor update as well, which I'll get to in a minute. But the idea with the meta model is just to show you overall how does the knowledge base work and how do you go from the objective through to the outcome. Where you see these dotted lines, it means you're building value. It happens before you can deliver. You could ignore this point here. Actually, when you look at the value, so here you've got the value stream stage, the value item, value proposition, and value stream. So slightly different. So the value item, I believe, could probably come out of this as well, but it's similar to what you have in BIZBOK. All right, now we're going to look at the big change that has occurred. So dynamic rules routing used to be called case management on its own, but now it's far more focused on dynamic rules routing than it is on case management, actually, which makes sense. It makes sense, but I would say, and we're still keeping it case management and dynamic rules routing because in the exam is actually about case management. And so the exam, although I think there's one question around dynamic rules routing, if I'm honest, but there's a lot of stuff that's been added to dynamic rules routing, and I think that has been very helpful. So let's start. So that we've redesigned this entire module of our course to align with the newest version. And as I said, I will show you in a minute why this matters. So the definition of case management, what you'll see is that there's additional terms that are used. So case management is a business design concept that provides a means of envisaging business solutions in complex, multidimensional, unpredictable, and in parallel work environments. Essentially, that just means if you were working, let's say, as a lawyer, or let's say you were a journalist, investigative journalist, or you were working for the FBI, whatever, wherever you were working, you're dealing with cases. And so just as if you were a patient, you're a case. And so there's no real process. So you have rules. So you have to follow certain rules, but the process isn't as predictable. And what I found is really good about this is that for most knowledge workers, we don't follow processes. We have to use and we have to sense make a lot of these things as we go through them. So I like that they brought this in, but I do want to highlight this is going to become more and more important. Again, I'll show you in a minute. So the definition, a method, now this wasn't in the latest one, or some of it wasn't in the latest one. I'm not sure exactly of what, but I've left some old definitions that I've used and added the new ones as well. So you have a blend in this module of what is in the current BIZBOK and what was in the previous BIZBOK, just so that you've got the full view and that you're exam ready. So it's a method or practice of coordinating work by organizing all the relevant pieces into a place called a case. And then dynamic rules routing discipline is primarily a means of implementing case management solutions. So instead of saying, these are the steps you have to follow verbatim, rather you look at what are the rules we need to apply? So how do we know we go from one stage to another? So we use different examples, and I'll go through some more details. So next, we look at the binding object. Now, a binding object is a new term that's come in, and essentially it means is what is the thing that holds the glue across all of these, like these dynamic rules? So what is the object that's in the value stream that is the glue between all of these? So a binding object establishes and maintains associations to related objects bound by real-world necessity. The binding object is the main business object transitioning through a value stream that binds related business objects that collectively form the basis of a delivery value. It's a mouthful. It is in the course. And so there's about an hour of this course now, what used to be 20 minutes. So there's a lot more in there. But simply, if you look at, let's say, a value stream, there will be something that is the glue that joins all of the sections of the value stream or the value stream stages to join them all together. So in this case, an agreement. So let's say you're buying a car. So you want to buy a new car and you want this great fancy car. But if for each stage, there's an object that binds all of the things together to reach the outcome. And in this example, this would be the agreement. So when I buy a car, it's not just the product, it's the agreement that binds all of these steps together. So from when I initiate the request, we start building this agreement. And then I have the acceptance application. So this is the binding object is the thing that glues all of these components together. The same thing would be if you're using the example of settle claim or settle payment options. The binding object for a claim would be the claim itself, and settle payment obligations would be a payment. That would be the binding object that adds the value to the value stream. So it took me a couple of days to really process some of these things. Again, for those existing or previous learners, please go and have a look at what's happening with your binding object. Again, this will not be in your exam. Okay, so my normal rule would be we don't add it to your course because why would we add something that might be confusing? But because I think that this is a good future learning, even if you're not being asked for it in the exam, it's an important thing to understand because definitely as you look at AI in the future, it will have impact. So just a definition here, while agreement serves as a binding object in value streams where it has a changing state, it's not always the binding object in other value streams. So it's just saying, even though it might sound the same, it actually has a different value stream altogether. All right, then we look at dynamic rules routing. Now this is the exciting bit. So dynamic rules routing, basically what it's saying is that for each value stream stage, what's happening? What are the rules that are happening? So if I want to buy a car and I've got to approve my loan, so I want to buy this massive fancy, I don't know, whatever, sports car, but I need a loan in order to do that. So I first got to apply for this loan for the car. And if we just look at this value stream stage, the loan officer, let me go back a minute, the loan officer would have to review the information that I provide. It would have to review me as a case. The credit bureau, which is an external stakeholder, will have to review if I have the credit to do that, right? The contract officer might have to look at what is the contract that I'm looking at. Can I fulfill the contract? Have I signed it correctly? Have I done all of these things? The loan applicant, which is me, will also need to look at the documentation and fill out forms and information. And then there may be other people in the queue, as in the business, where things are holding and you're waiting for feedback and you haven't assigned it to somebody yet. Now, the very important thing about dynamic rules-based routing, or they call it DRBR, I just called it whatever I want, but basically is that the numbers are irrelevant. Okay. That is the thing that makes it confusing for those who are used to processes, right? The numbers are an indication of the things that need to happen and go on. And usually it has some level of sequence, right? If it hasn't gone to the loan officer, it's unlikely that the credit bureau will get it. So those are things to just consider. But unlike a process flow, which has definite stages in it, dynamic rules routing is more like a cog in a wheel, right? So this needs to work for that to work, but it doesn't need to happen at the same time or in a sequence of events. So that was the hard thing to really focus on when it comes to dynamic rules routing. So just bear that in mind. Next, a case consists of multiple value streams and therefore multiple dynamic rules routing. So it's not just one particular thing, it's a whole lot of different things. And this is what makes the whole thing tough, because you can imagine now the amount of work that would be needed. However, what's better about it is that if you try to do processes on processes, it's going to be a lot of work as well. So in my mind, personally, having a value stream with dynamic rules routing, in other words, what are the rules that are driving the interaction? And bear in mind, if we can do simple automations through processes, we go that route. That's the easy route, right? But most of us, as I said, don't have a routine-based process. We are dealing with cases, we're dealing with people, we're dealing with more complexity. Putting it together in the cases in who is the user that we are giving this to, what is the value that's been added, and then putting that together, joining it with our value streams allows for better case management, because now we can do the dynamic rules routing, but with a value stream. So dynamic rules routing is not unique to business architecture, but it's really good to work with value streams, capabilities, and dynamic rules routing. So this was done by Ken Williams. We redid it a little bit, but just to highlight that he did have a session a couple of years ago at one of the architecture summits, and he put all of this. So not taking any credit for what he's put together here. Obviously, this diagram comes directly from the guild, and we've obviously just optimized and improved some of the diagrams as we usually do in our courses. But there is a handout that comes via the guild that you can look up that was done by Ken Williams. So thanks, Ken, for doing that. It's not part of the course, but I'm just showing you there is material out there that you could use as part of your learning. I'll ask to send the link to that as well. So really what he is saying here is, and I'm just going to take the notes from this, validating the rules-based routing map input and outputs can be time-consuming, as I mentioned, but is extremely helpful downstream. You will notice that the direct and indirect correlation between rules-based dynamic routing map and business architecture concepts like organizational map, value streams, capabilities, stakeholders are really good, especially the values added to design thinking, benefit realization and change management. So you can add it to lots of different kinds of things. Very exciting. Now, before I move on to the next section, I actually wanted to show you, I did a quick, using Aiden, I did a quick example of dynamic rules routing. So I've started with a prompt. I want to get a loan. Now, I haven't done the whole process, but I'm simulating it just to show you what I mean by this is important in terms of AI. So here's my user prompt. I've got an assistant prompt, and then I've got a chat node, but I've also got the matching roles that we discussed. Loan admin, we've got the loan officer, the contract officer, the unmatched, and I haven't loaded the rest, but I want to show you proof of concept, right? So that's really what you're looking at. I've also created a subgraph here, which I will just move back into front end for now. And so now I want you to imagine that AI is picking up all of these different roles that you have and is now starting to ask you different questions. So if I run this, so each agent is now representing the human. So it's like a digital twin. So the first prompt that comes up is from the contract officer. This is what I need. Load the approval documents, borrower information, load the agreement, property information, if applicable, signatures, and then these would be the next steps. And then as a user, I would say, I will come back to him. All right. We're just simulating, but now you can see the other one, which is the loan applicant. So now you've got AI playing in this rules-based thing. These are the things that I need, and these are the whole list. So I would then have to go, okay, but you can see now it's already, it looks like you're preparing to gather the information, and now it's asking for more information. So I'm just going to stop the run at the moment. And obviously this is our Aiden tool, and this is for generating your architecture. However, what I wanted to show you, so I've just stopped the run, is that just what I've shown you with dynamic rules routing, you can automate that dynamic rules routing using AI. So it's a very simple example. I'm not going to go into too much detail on all of it, but you are now starting to route using your matching node all of these different agents to gather that case management information for you. And you can build different types of things. So anyone who's interested in knowing the details around this and the details around using Aiden backend rivets, just let me know. So just to reiterate what we just spoke about, this here, oops, sorry, this here is what I was meaning when I said this is what we're looking at when it comes to dynamic rules routing and how AI can actually start rebuilding all of that. So you take a value stream, and for each value stream, you create the dynamic rules on how it needs to be routed and what information needs to be done. And remember, the difference between a process and an automation is that it's predictive, whereas if you're looking at an agent or you're looking at dynamic rules routing, it's based on rules, but there might be differences. So they might not have the funding, or they might not have this. AI can actually reason those things and be able to use those rules. All right, less exciting, but still important. So module 13, Lean Six Sigma. Lean is fantastic. Lean really does talk about value streams, but lean value streams are different to business architecture value streams. I've always said it disappoints me that we're using the same terms because it confuses people sometimes. But Lean value streams are around eliminating waste. So how do we get rid of waste? So in terms of the changes, there are minor changes to the content, and the focus on the updates have primarily been on updating the images. So there's no real change in what we show you. So remember I mentioned at the beginning, we do the images anyway. So it's not as if it's going to be difficult to find, but that's what's been changed. And then some small changes have been made to update the summaries. So just the general summaries, an example such as a change is reflected in the following slides. So here's the principles. So this has been removed. So business, this is what it used to say. And now, so it used to say business architecture value streams provide end-to-end view of how to achieve value from external and internal customers. And that is now gone, which I find interesting. I'm not sure why, but yeah, it's gone. So if we look at the principles now for lean, architecture brings visibility upstream, downstream, and so forth. And then when we look at requirements, there's also been some very simple grammatical changes. Now, remember when I showed you the meta model at the very beginning? The meta model, not at the beginning, but midway, the meta model, I include the requirements. Now, requirements itself has a meta model. So let me show you the diagram that I've done. So we've got value stream and value stream stage frames a requirement. A requirement impacts a capability, behavior, an instance, and capability. And a requirement targets the stakeholder, and the stakeholder participates. And there's an objective, and there's an initiative. And so if we go back to that meta model that I discussed, requirements is framed by a value stream, belongs to an initiative, fulfills an objective, targets a stakeholder. So as you can see, it's very similar to what you have. Now, we do have more meta models that we've added into our course, which are not part of the main meta model, and that will be reflected in module 10 of your course. They've also brought in one for service-oriented architecture. Okay, next we're going to look at, again, some minor changes that have occurred with business performance management. So business performance management is, you've got minor changes that highlight and focus, to highlight and focus metrics. Now you'll notice in your meta models, your knowledge base, it obviously talks about metrics, but it doesn't actually really talk about metrics, which is a bit odd. But I think it's safe to say that you need to measure every part of what you're doing in your architecture, right? So just make that assumption. But this module around business performance management is really important because that's what we're looking at. So this section has minor changes to highlight the focus on metrics. Most changes include renaming headings. Additional examples reflect enhanced wording, and an example of such a change is reflected in the following slide. So before, these were the terms, and so now it's just been updated. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Offers insights into root cause analysis, as you can see. Offers insights into root cause analysis. And so now we've just highlighted those diagrams a little bit better. So yeah, additional sections that have been updated. Minor grammatical errors, updates have also been made to application portfolio management data, solution architecture, and IT architecture infrastructure. In terms of the glossary, so the glossary, there's been a change. What used to be called service architecture is called service-oriented architecture. And the definition has also changed. So what it used to be a set of principles and methods for designing and developing software using a concept called service has now been changed to a collection of principles and methodologies for designing and developing software based on the concept of software service. There's a new one as well. Software service is a self-contained unit of software that performs a specific task with 3 components: an interface, a contract, and an implementation. I thought that was quite a nice definition, to be honest, so pretty happy with that. All right, so just quickly going back a bit to this. All right, so we had some minor grammatical changes in application, portfolio management, business information, data alignment, business architecture and solution architecture, business architecture, IT, infrastructure. Notice the update meta model for this. It discusses around how the capability and software service and the business object all kind of relate, as well as the information. So just be aware of that change as well. Quite important. Okay, heading back to the business architecture role. So we also now in our course have the full role described in module 10. So that's also been added. And sometimes these updates will take a little bit to load in there. So please don't panic if you don't see it in the next day or two, but it'll go in. It's all been edited. So it's just waiting for the updates. But really, this was around, because you do get questions around particularly how you would manage capabilities and what a role of a mentor or a map maker is. Although I do discuss this in the introduction, module 0, and I talk about the responsibilities of a business architect, there's now a more detailed view of the types of roles that you'll be looking at and what you need to understand. So now the important thing is to look at the exam. Okay, so for the exam, the business architecture fundamental concepts. All right, so when we look at the exam structure, the business architecture fundamental concepts, that is in module 0. That is the free preview where we understand some of the basics about business architecture, and I talk a little bit about the history and so forth. And so just understanding some of the terms, what is a business architect, and that matters. Let me just go back a minute. And then you've got your core mapping, and those are modules 1 to 4. So if you remember, I spoke all the way back in the beginning, which is this. These are your 4 main modules, and this is where the majority of the questions are going to come from. And the majority of these questions are all around things like what's the definition of a capability and the Oxford comma and all of those kind of things. That's what I mean by core. Let me just quickly. Sorry. Okay. And then we've got, okay. And so let's just go all the way back. So you have to know the core, and you'll see even in your exam, there are more questions there than in the other modules. And then you've got your extended mapping, which are modules 5 to 9, and that includes your strategy. Now, your strategy is going to consist of 2 things. So we've updated in the course strategy to execution. So there's a module on strategy to execution. Now that technically in BIZBOK is not in your main bits, but actually it's a very important part and it's part of your strategy. Originally what BIZBOK has done is it just talks about strategy mapping, but doesn't talk about strategy to execution. By the way, you'll notice in BIZBOK 14, they have changed the name strategy to realization, but they haven't also changed the name. Yeah, there's some confusion in there. So we're sticking to strategy to execution for now. But in module 5, it was always just all the techniques. So you'll notice all these techniques and the techniques have been added, but you'll have strategy to execution now as part 1 of module 5 in your course. So strategy to execution, and then the techniques have been joined together. And even though it represents things differently in the BIZBOK, that it's important to know that this is how we are helping you learn. So that's an important part. Modules 5 to 7, there's extended mapping questions. Then you've got business architecture alignment with related disciplines like lean and dynamic rules routing and case management and processes and requirements. Those are all extended business architecture practices. So that's all part of up to chapter 14 or module 14. The performance measures is module 15. So the updates that have been made there are actually separate. And there's actually quite a few quiz questions around this. So important measure, it does link a lot to heat mapping and the business model canvas. So make sure that you do learn the business model canvas. And when it comes to techniques, and I've now learned to say it correctly, it's the Hoshin Kanri. Very important technique that you need to know. So business model canvas and Hoshin Kanri, 2 really important things that you need to know. And then you'll see module 10 takes up quite a lot of space in what you've been examined on, and that is the role of a business architect, as I mentioned, that's been added into your course, the lists of all the things that you need to know about. You're not going to be examined on every single thing, but it's part of module 10 and you do need to know about it. It's also the architecture governance. There's been some wording changes. You won't be questioned on that, but you do need to look at your spreadsheet and see what updates there have been. And then you have the business scenarios. This is where the most difficult questions come from. And so the scenarios in module 10, because it's all an Excel spreadsheet that you download, and it's how do you cross map the relationships, let's say, between capabilities and could be value streams, cross map to data, cross map to information concepts. Like you need to understand those different scenarios and how those scenarios work. And remember, it's a free download you can have from the course, and you can understand how the relationships work. Now, I do want to say, BIZBOK prescribes these things as part of the exam. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to think it's correct, all of that. But for passing your exam, you just have to go with what they say. And that's the point, that they're testing to see if you've read what's in the BIZBOK. We don't choose what goes into the exam. So please just remember that you can apply business architecture in your own way, in your own environment. But to pass the exam, you have to do what BIZBOK suggests. Hopefully that makes sense. Infrastructure management, and then our knowledge base, also in module 10. Those are all the knowledge bases, and I talk about each one independently. And that was around the meta model that I spoke about earlier. Also, very important, you need to know that. And I'm not leaving this till last, but just this was a more natural flow. All the IT infrastructure, so not much has changed from previous releases, but you'll notice that some of the previous releases, there were quite a few changes, like with TOGAF and changing the business outcomes, and so like with the TOGAF references and changing some of the labeling and terms, those were all changed. So just bear that in mind with the changes that have been made. They are represented in the business. If there's time, and we covered a lot today, so just so that we are an accredited training provider, I think I can safely say that we are the leading training company that offers your CBA readiness. And so for those who are looking to become certified business architects and are taking it all seriously, I do recommend that you join us and join the rest of the successful people who've been on your course. It's been great meeting the various people. to get a copy of this, you can either rewatch some of this, but we will be doing a blog and we will be doing a write-up of all of this, and it'll be available in the course and in our library. So please just be aware of all of those things. And I think that's about it. I think one of the questions was, why did the changes get, why did the changes? Okay, so as I mentioned in the beginning, the community is the one that creates all of these parts of your BIZBOK. So as the community sees things that are more relevant and more updated, that's the kind of thing that they'd look at. And that's how BIZBOK gets updated. Just a reminder, if you want to know more about dynamic rules routing and you want to know more about what we're doing with Aiden and really architecting AI for business, that would be great. We also have a new course coming up on the 1st of July, which is the AI Business Architect. It is a guild recognized course and you can get certification with it. It is a detailed course around AI. Yeah, lots going on. I hope that you enjoy your update and happy learning, everybody. Please reach out here to answer questions that you might have. And thank you again for being part of this community. Happy learning.